10 million tons. That's how much copper the world will be short by 2030. And without it, every electric vehicle, every solar panel, every wind turbine they promised you, it all stops. They told you the green energy revolution was inevitable. They mandated electric vehicles by 2035. They promised renewable energy would save the planet. They made it sound like the future was already here. But here's what they didn't tell you. None of it can happen. Not because of politics, not because of funding, because of something much simpler. There's not enough copper on Earth to build what they promised. The math doesn't work. The supply doesn't exist. The green energy revolution isn't just stalling. It's mathematically impossible. And when I show you the numbers, you'll understand why this is the biggest lie they've ever told. Welcome to Capital Decoded. If you're new here, I expose what's really happening in markets while everyone else repeats the headlines. Subscribe right now because this is the kind of analysis you will not find anywhere else. And if you find value in this video, smash that like button. It helps the algorithm show this to more people who need to see the truth. Let me paint you a picture of what they're promising. By 2035, California bans gas cars completely. New York follows. The entire European Union does the same. By 2040, they want 400 million electric vehicles on roads globally, not some of the cars, all of them. At the same time, they're pushing solar everywhere. Rooftops, deserts, fields. The goal is 8,000 gigawatts of solar capacity worldwide by 2050. That's 40 times more than we have today. Wind turbines? They want a triple capacity, offshore wind farms, onshore wind farms, wind turbines covering thousands of miles. And all of this runs on one thing, copper. Every electric vehicle needs copper. Every solar panel needs copper. Every wind turbine needs copper. Every charging station needs copper. Every transformer needs copper. Every wire connecting it all together needs copper. You cannot build the green energy future without massive amounts of copper. It's not optional. It's not a preference. It's the foundation of everything. Here's how much copper we're talking about. One electric vehicle uses 183 pounds of copper. A gas car, 48 pounds. That's almost 4 times more copper per vehicle. Multiply that by 400 million EVs and you need 73 million tons of copper just for cars. One wind turbine uses 4.7 tons of copper. Each one triple the global wind capacity and you need millions more tons. Solar panels use 5.5 tons of copper per megawatt. To hit their solar targets, you'd need another 44 million tons minimum. The electrical grid upgrades to handle all this. The US alone needs 5 million tons of copper just to modernize the grid. That's not counting Europe, Asia, or anywhere else. Add it all up, and the International Energy Agency projects we need 35 million tons of copper per year by 2030. And that number keeps climbing, 35 million tons per year. Now here's the problem. Current global copper production is 25 million tons per year. That's it. That's everything we mine right now across the entire planet. We need 35 million tons. We're producing 25 million tons. That's a 10 million ton per year deficit. And it's not getting better. It's getting worse. Because copper doesn't just appear. You can't print it. You can't create it in a lab. You have to dig it out of the ground. And that takes time, money, and resources that don't exist. Let me show you why this deficit is permanent. First, there are no major new copper discoveries. The last giant copper deposit discovered was in the 1990s. We've been exploring for 30 years and found almost nothing significant. The easy copper is gone. Second, existing mines are depleting. Ore grades are falling. In Chile, the world's largest copper producer, ore grades dropped from 1.2% copper content to 0.6%. That means you have to dig up and process twice as much rock to get the same amount of copper. It's slower, more expensive, and less efficient. Third, even if you find copper today, it takes 10 to 15 years to bring a new mine online. Environmental studies, permits, construction, infrastructure. You're not solving a 2030 problem by finding copper in 2024. You're solving a 2040 problem, maybe. Fourth, mining copper is getting exponentially more difficult. The shallow deposits are exhausted. Now you're going deeper, into harder rock, in more remote locations, with more complex geology. Production costs are climbing every single year. Fifth, the countries with the most copper are politically unstable or hostile to Western interests. Chile has massive protests targeting mines. Peru has civil unrest shutting down operations. The Democratic Republic of Congo has corruption and conflict. Russia has sanctions. China controls much of the processing. You're building your entire energy future on a supply chain that's fragile, depleting, and located in countries that don't necessarily want to help you. S&P Global, one of the most respected mining research firms in the world, published a study showing the exact deficit timeline. By 2025, we'll be short 1.6 million tons. By 2030, we'll be short 10 million tons per year. By 2035, the deficit could hit 15 million tons annually. This isn't a conspiracy theory. This is math. This is geology. This is the physical reality of how much metal exists in the earth and how fast we can extract it. The International Copper Study Group confirms it. Wood Mackenzie confirms it. Every major mining analyst confirms it. The copper isn't there. The supply cannot meet the demand they're projecting. And yet governments keep mandating electric vehicles, keep pushing solar and wind, keep promising a green energy future, as if saying it enough times will make copper appear out of thin air. So what happens when you mandate something that's physically impossible? One of three things, and none of them are good. Option one, prices explode. When demand massively exceeds supply, prices go vertical. Copper is currently around $8,500 per ton. If this deficit hits, we're looking at $15,000 per ton, maybe $20,000, maybe higher. What does that do to your electric vehicle? The copper alone adds $3,000 to $5,000 to the price. That $35,000 EV you were promised, it's now $40,000 or $45,000. And that's just the copper. Lithium, nickel, cobalt, they all have the same supply problems. Your affordable electric car just became a luxury item only the wealthy can afford. What does that do to solar panels, to wind turbines, to grid infrastructure? Every single thing gets more expensive. The green energy transition they promised would save you money? It will bankrupt you. Option two, shortages. Physical shortages. You have the money, but the copper doesn't exist. Wait lists for EVs extend for years. Solar panel production halts. Wind turbine manufacturers can't fulfill orders. The electrical grid upgrades just stop. Rolling blackouts become normal because the infrastructure to support renewable energy was never completed. You mandated electric vehicles, but there's no copper to build charging stations. You mandated solar energy, but there's no copper to connect it to the grid. You outlawed gas cars, but the alternative doesn't exist yet. What do people do? They keep driving their old gas cars as long as possible. The used car market explodes. Gas prices stay high because demand doesn't decrease. You didn't transition to clean energy, you just made transportation more expensive and less reliable. Option three, they abandon the mandates. Quietly, slowly, without admitting they were wrong. California pushes back the 2035 deadline, then pushes it again. The European Union creates exceptions, then more exceptions. The targets get revised, the promises get walked back, but the damage is done. Billions, maybe trillions, were spent on an impossible transition. Entire industries were restructured around mandates that couldn't be fulfilled. Jobs were lost, companies went bankrupt, and the people who promised you this future, they'll blame someone else and move on to the next thing. Here's the part that should really disturb you. They know, the people pushing these mandates, they have access to the same data I'm showing you right now. They've seen the projections, they've read the mining reports, they know about the 10 million ton deficit, and they're doing it anyway. Why? Because the green energy transition isn't about energy, it's about control. It's about restructuring the economy. It's about creating dependence on systems they manage. Think about where the copper supply chain runs. China refines 40% of the world's copper. They don't mine most of it, but they process it. Without Chinese refineries, the global copper supply chain collapses. You want to build your electric vehicle, you're dependent on China. You want to install solar panels, you're dependent on China. You want to upgrade the grid, you're dependent on China. America shut down most of its copper refining capacity over the last 30 years. Environmental regulations made it too expensive. We outsourced it. Now we have one major copper refinery left in the entire country. One. So when they mandate electric vehicles and renewable energy, they're not making you energy independent. They're making you dependent on China. The country that controls the processing controls the supply. And right now, that's not us. China understands this perfectly. While America and Europe argue about carbon emissions and climate goals, China is hoarding copper. Their strategic reserves have increased 300% since 2020. They're buying physical copper, storing it, and waiting, because they know what's coming. When the deficit hits, when prices explode, when shortages spread, China will have the copper, and they'll have the leverage. You'll buy electric vehicles on their terms. You'll install solar panels on their terms. You'll build your energy infrastructure on their terms. This isn't an energy transition. It's a transfer of power from the west to the east, from oil-producing nations to metal-refining nations, from energy independence to supply chain dependence. And copper is just the beginning. Lithium, cobalt, nickel, rare earth elements. China dominates the processing of all of them. The entire green energy supply chain runs through China. every single critical material. They didn't do this by accident. They've been positioning for this for 30 years. While we shut down mines and refineries to meet environmental standards, they built them. While we mandated electric vehicles without securing supply chains, they secured the supply chains. We outsourced our future to a geopolitical rival, and now we're mandating a transition that makes us completely dependent on them. Let me show you the numbers so you know this isn't speculation. Global copper demand in 2020, 25 million tons. Demand projected for 2030, 35 million tons. That's a 40% increase in 10 years. Current mine production, 25 million tons per year. New mine projects coming online by 2030, less than 2 million tons per year in additional capacity. That doesn't even cover the growth, let alone fill the deficit. Major copper producers by country. Chile, 5.6 million tons per year. But production has been flat or declining since 2018 due to falling ore grades, water shortages, and political instability. Peru, 2.4 million tons per year, but mining operations face constant protests and regional conflicts. China, 1.7 million tons per year, but they consume 14 million tons per year domestically. They're a massive net importer, not an exporter. Democratic Republic of Congo, 1.9 million tons per year, but the country is plagued by corruption, conflict, and infrastructure problems. These are your top copper producers, and every single one of them has serious problems scaling production. Let's look at specific project timelines. Quellaveco in Peru, one of the largest new copper mines in development, took 10 years from discovery to production. It came online in 2022 and produces 300,000 tons per year. That's one of the biggest new projects in a decade, and it produces just 1.2% of global demand. The Kamoa-Kakula mine in the DRC is another major project. It took 8 years from initial construction to commercial production. It produces 400,000 tons per year. Again, barely 1.5% of global demand. This is what solving the copper shortage looks like. Projects that take a decade to build and produce a fraction of what's needed. You'd need 30 of these projects coming online simultaneously just to fill the deficit. We don't have 30, we have maybe 5 in development worldwide, and most of those won't be operational until after 2030. Now let's look at copper intensity by technology. One electric vehicle, 183 pounds of copper. One Tesla Model 3 specifically uses 85 kilograms, which is 187 pounds. One Ford F-150 Lightning uses even more because it's a larger vehicle, over 200 pounds. One onshore wind turbine, 4.7 tons of copper per megawatt of capacity. Offshore wind uses even more, up to 9.6 tons per megawatt because of the cabling, substations, and grid connections required. Solar panels, 5.5 tons of copper per megawatt. Large-scale solar farms can require 20 megawatts or more, which is over 100 tons of copper for a single installation. Charging stations. A DC fast charger uses 800 pounds of copper per unit. If you want EV infrastructure across America, you need millions of these stations. Electrical grid upgrades. The U.S. Department of Energy estimates the grid needs $2 trillion in upgrades to handle renewable energy and EV charging. That requires approximately 5 million tons of copper just for the United States. That's 20% of annual global production for one country's grid alone. These are not estimates. These are engineering requirements. This is how much copper each technology physically requires to function. You can't reduce it. You can't substitute it. Copper is the only material with the conductivity, durability, and cost effectiveness to work at scale, and there's not enough of it. Here's what they're not telling you. This has happened before. In the 2000s, there was a massive copper boom. China was industrializing, infrastructure was being built everywhere, copper demand exploded. Prices went from $1,500 per ton in 2003 to over $10,000 per ton in 2008, a 600% increase in 5 years. What happened? Projects got delayed, costs skyrocketed, construction slowed down, and when the financial crisis hit, everything collapsed. Copper crashed back down. Mines shut down. Investment disappeared. The boom-bust cycle in commodities always follows the same pattern. Governments or industries make massive plans based on optimistic assumptions. Demand projections go vertical. Everyone assumes supply will magically appear. It doesn't. Prices spike. Projects become uneconomical. The whole thing falls apart. We're watching it happen again, except this time it's not infrastructure in one country. It's a global energy transition affecting every developed nation simultaneously. The scale is exponentially larger, and the timeline is impossibly short. They're trying to transform the entire global energy system in 15 to 20 years, using materials that take 10 to 15 years to bring online. The math doesn't work. But here's the difference. In the 2000s, the copper boom was driven by market forces. This time it's driven by government mandates. They're not asking if the copper exists. They're mandating that you use it anyway. They're not letting the market adjust. They're forcing the transition regardless of physical constraints. That's why this is worse. In a market-driven shortage, prices rise, demand adjusts, and equilibrium is eventually restored. In a government-mandated shortage, prices rise, demand stays artificially high because of regulations, and the system breaks. You can't mandate something into existence. You can't legislate away geology. You can't regulate your way out of a supply deficit. So here's the reality nobody wants to say out loud. The green energy transition, as currently planned, is not going to happen. Not by 2035, not by 2040, probably not by 2050. Not because people don't want it, not because the technology isn't ready, because the materials don't exist in the quantities required. You can have some electric vehicles, you can have some solar panels, you can have some wind turbines, but you can't have all of them at the scale they're promising. The copper shortage alone makes it impossible. Add lithium, cobalt, nickel, and rare earths, and it becomes absurd. What will actually happen? A slower partial transition. The wealthy will get electric vehicles. The rest will keep driving gas cars longer. Some regions will get renewable energy. Others will keep using fossil fuels because they have no choice. The grand promises will be quietly abandoned and replaced with vague long-term goals that never seem to arrive. Meanwhile, massive amounts of money will be wasted. Subsidies for industries that can't scale, mandates that can't be fulfilled, infrastructure projects that never get completed, all funded by taxpayers who were sold a dream that was physically impossible from the start. And the biggest winner? China, because they control the supply chains. They have the copper reserves. They have the refining capacity. They have the leverage. While the West spent decades focused on carbon emissions and climate conferences, China focused on securing physical resources. They didn't just talk about the future. They positioned to control it. This is the green energy trap. It's not about saving the planet. It's about who controls the resources required to power the future. And right now, that's not us. 10 million tons. That's the copper deficit by 2030. That's not a prediction. That's not a worst-case scenario. That's the gap between what we need and what exists based on current projects and production timelines. They told you the green energy revolution was inevitable. They mandated electric vehicles. They promised renewable energy. They made it sound like the future was already decided, but the copper doesn't exist. The supply chains aren't secure. The infrastructure can't be built. The math doesn't work. This isn't about being against clean energy. This is about being honest about what's physically possible. You can't build a future on materials that don't exist in sufficient quantities. You can't mandate something into reality. The green energy transition is failing, not because of politics, not because of technology, because of geology, because of supply chains, because of basic math. And the people pushing these mandates? They know. They've seen the same reports. They've read the same projections. They're doing it anyway because it's not about energy. It's about control. It's about dependency. It's about restructuring the global economy regardless of whether it actually works. Copper is the foundation of everything they're promising, and there's not enough of it. When prices explode, when shortages hit, when projects get delayed, when mandates get abandoned, remember that you saw this coming. Remember that the numbers were always public. Remember that they lied to you about what was possible. They called it the green energy revolution. I call it the copper reality check. 10 million tons short. And there's no solution in sight. If this opened your eyes to what's really happening, hit that subscribe button. More content like this is coming. And smash that like button so the algorithm shows this to people who need to understand what's coming. This is Capital Decoded, and this is the truth they don't want you to see.